Vidhammer Fantasy.
Welcome back to Vidhammer. I'm Spudlow, bringing you another weekly battle report. This is a friendly game where I take a 3,000 point plague-themed list that was given by Warhammer Freak, one of the channel followers. And I go up against Steve with more of the new dwarves from the latest army book. We had to proxy a few things to get everything on the board. I have one plague furnace, but the other plague furnace is actually being proxied in by an old modeled screaming bell, where I actually just took the bell part of the model out. Then there's a backwards moving warp lightning cannon you're going to see trouncing around the upper part of the screen. That is actually the second hell pit. The first hell pit, my actual Sweet Lovin' model, was deployed down at the bottom of the screen and actually didn't get any camera time the entire time. I should have swapped those two out, but didn't realize it until things were already over. On Steve's side, there's a gyro bomber you'll see that's actually just a regular gyrocopter. There's also a lone ogre model that does a little trumping around. That's a gyrocopter as well. Our scenario that we rolled for, we ended up getting battle line. Then we rolled for terrain and what the actual terrain pieces were on the random terrain generator, and this is what we came up with. 7, right?
Yeah.
Another mysterious forest. So we have 2 forests, a building, a hill, and a magical mystery.
Magical mysteries roll a D6. It's a 4. A sorcerer's portal. What the?
As we do our deployment, we start putting things down the line. Even though Steve won the roll, he decided to let me deploy first. The only main thing, putting my gunner runners up at the top, thinking that they're going to run around and go after either the flame cannon or the engineer that he puts up there, the base of that forest for his shooting. I know I've got to keep my slave units close to my general, Lord Skrulk, who's in the central unit of plague monks. They have the plague banner, so they give them a little more fighting potential. Then there are 2 other, level 2 plague priests on the plague furnace. One unit at the top and one at the bottom. I'm on the left side, that is. And I know I've got to keep my slaves close to the general, otherwise they're basically going to be useless. But I should have actually put my central plague monks as 5 wide. It would have given me more room to keep things closer together and still work through the choke point that's in the middle of this board. It's not going to be easy to try to get everything through there, and if I had just bit the bullet and gone 5 wide, things probably would have started out being much closer together, and I would have had more of a combat potential from the beginning. For spell generation, I've got 2 level 2 plague priests. One of them has a dispel scroll, and that one ends up with pestilent breath and blessed with filth, which I believe is the upper one, while the other one gets vermintide and cloud of corruption. Lord Skrulk, who's in the center, gets Wither, Plague, and Pestilent Breath, which is his signature spell. Then we go over for Steve's Vanguard moves, and there they are, dwarves all up in my grill right from the beginning. I've got a +1 for this one, and I go ahead and get the first turn. Going with the notion that a weapon unused is a useless weapon, I say heck with it. I'm going to have Skrulk go ahead and charge the Iron Drakes, try to get those guys out of the way. They stand and shoot for 3, then I move up several of the other units. And this is about where I realize that I'm not going to be able to get a flank charge on the Iron Drakes. So if I don't kill them off, that's a serious problem for me. The Plague Furnaces, or Plague Furni, I guess, try to get in as close as they can. And as far as the slaves go, I don't know what the hell I was thinking there. I blame late in the day and low blood sugar, or something. Magic is 5 versus 4, and I use my first 3 dice for Wither on the Iron Drakes, but he dispels that one. Then I go for 2 dice for Bless with Filth on Lord Skrulk's Plague Monks, and he lets that one go, so at least I'm going to have a little more of a punch when it comes to the combat phase. And as that one turns out, the Plague Monks manage to kill off 8 of the Iron Drakes, and they only take 2. And even though you're winning the combat, they are stubborn and they're not going anywhere. So that spells bad news for the upcoming. Then there's a little bit of late shooting that Steve lets me do. I have the gutter runners shoot for the flame cannon, and they get 1 wound. Over to the dwarves, the hammers make their obvious charge into the combat. Then, as the gyrocopters fly around, they drop a couple of bombs, one on the small slave unit for 8 wounds, and the other one onto the gutter runners, which I was not anticipating. It probably should have done a significant number of wounds there, statistically, but it only manages to kill off a single gutter runner, so at least hooray for that. I'm not sure what effect the terrain had on my turn. I don't know if we rolled for it, or if we did roll for it, it just turned out to be irrelevant. But for this round, it ends up giving -1 strength and -1 toughness to the hammerers. Not as if it's going to do me a lot of good, but it'll save a couple of models when it comes to combat time. There's no magic, so we head into shooting. The engineer helps the flame cannon to avoid its misfire. It shoots at the upper plague monks and actually manages 11 wounds on them with a good distance from that. Then in the off-screen stuff that's down below, the organ gun fires at the hell pit and puts a single wound on it. You can't see it, but the hell pit is a little bit to the right of center at this point, I believe, and the organ gun is on the lower right corner of the board. It's only about 2 inches from the back edge. Then we do our combat. His Dwarf Lord makes a challenge, issues a challenge, and my unit champion goes ahead and accepts this one. It's not really much of an accepting of the challenge, more than all the other rank and file models step back one, and they didn't tell him about it. So then the Lord turns around and goes, "Oh, well, challenge is with you." Sorry, buddy. He gives the other guys a finger as he gets cut down without too much ceremony. The Plague Monks hit the Iron Drakes for 4, which takes them down to only 2 left. And the BSB gets hit for 3, but he saves them all from his 3+ armor save. 4 monks die, and there were 4 more wounds in overkill. So I lose the combat, and I lose Frenzy, but the Menish decides to stick around for another round and see what else they can do. Back to me, I start doing a lot of charging on this round. The important part at the top, behind the portal, there's a unit of giant rats there that are blocking a significant amount of frontage from the plague furnace. So I go ahead and have the giant rats charge the Longbeards so that the plague furnace can charge in as well and get a good deal of models into combat. That unfortunately makes the giant rats the closest unit to the portal. Irritating. Then down at the bottom, I want the plague furnace to be able to charge the gyrocopter, since it's the only thing that has it in the front arc. So I have to get the clan rats out of the way, which means charging them into the warriors, which means I have to get the giant rats out of the way. So I go ahead and have them charge the warriors as well. Both of those units are expendable. The gyrocopter is worth more than both of them put together. So we do the charges. The giant rats actually manage to make it to the warriors, the poor bastards, because the slaves pull up short. Then, of course, the upper plague furnace and giant rats make it into that combat, and the lower one makes it to the gyrocopter because it had a short fleeing distance and they were able to catch it. Then I have the slaves take a sidestep to put the Grey Seer as far out of the impending combat as I can. Terrain does its stuff. The portal takes away the giant rat's armor save. And even though it's not a problem for me, the irritation is that could have been on the hammerers, which would have been really stinking nice. But I was, maybe a quarter of an inch closer to the portal than they were. Bummer. Onto the magic phase. I use 3 dice for Bless with Filth on the central plague monks, and this one gets dispelled. I used the next 2 for Wither, and I needed to roll a 5 to get the spell to go off, and I rolled a 4. So that's so much for Skrulk for this round. The last 2 versus his 6, I rolled 2 dice for your mom, and I rolled a 9, but he dispelled it, so I didn't get to do your mom. There's no shooting this time, so we go over to combat, where the gutter runners, deciding to go into melee, put a wound on the cannon, but it's stubborn, Still has 1 wound left. The very brave rats towards the bottom fail to kill anything and take 11 wounds. Next time, just fail the charge. It'll be easier, I promise. Up at the top, Plague Monks and the rats don't do anything. The Plague Furnace takes a single wound, a few of the monks die, and the Furnace manages to take out 5 of the Longbeards, but I still lose combat, Furnace being unbreakable. The rats aren't, but they actually pass their break test, which they would actually run and just be out of range, but at this point they've taken enough wounds to be out of range of the portal anyway. Then our central combat, the Iron Drakes die. Yay, victory! That's like my 1 victory. I count that as my victory right there. There's no damage to the Thane or the BSB, and I lose the combat by 3, but pass the break test again. Yay! Actually managed to reform amid defeat, and I use this to try to pull as many models away from my frontage as I possibly can, because I know the warriors are charging in and it's going to be just as bad. Warriors with their great weapons do in fact charge into combat. I didn't see that one coming at all. There's a copter charges into the flank of the gutter runners, trying to double team those guys. And the other copter continues to flee, goes across the terrain from the scree slope, and ends up taking a wound from dangerous terrain. Then our central portal gives the hammerers, now that I'm not within range, gives them speed of light. For shooting this time, the organ gun manages to hit the hell pit for 3, that's the lower one. The upper one actually gets shot at by the engineer who pulled out his pistols, but it didn't manage to wound. Then we do combat again. Up at the top, the giant rats die on this round, and some of the monks as well. I lose the combat, but am unbreakable once again. Gutter runners manage to kill off the flame cannon, and they don't wound the copter. They roll a 3 for the break test and pass, and I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. They aren't able to do it twice and actually get a reform out of it, though. That's fine. As we start our combat in the center, we actually have a rules challenge between me and Steve, and I'll show you what that one turns out as. Soda on the line, and here's the challenge. If you declare a challenge, the acceptor can't move to the challenger. Does the challenger then move to the acceptor, or does the challenger just stay where he is at all times? Steve says you stay where you are at all times. I say that if the challengee can't move to the challenger, then the challenger has to move to the challengee. If neither one of them can move, that's when they stay where they are. I'm looking it up right now. There's a soda on the line for this.
Look good, whatever. If for whatever reason this is not possible, assume the 2 models are in base contact.
Oh, shit.
Yeah! Yeah! What's up?
So Skrulk is used a challenge, and his lord accepts. Skrulk has a weapon where a Rod of Decay. If you manage to hit your opponent, they have to take a toughness test or be removed with no saves of any kind whatsoever. So, toughness 5, or toughness 6 actually, I think. But there's still, 6 is always a fail. There's a 1 in 6 chance you can just kill the guy outright, but it doesn't happen. Oh well. Doesn't get his insta-kill, so Skrulk dies. There wasn't much else he could bring to that combat. The Plague Monks generally mourn the loss, or they're stuck picking their butt, or maybe a little bit of both. But they lose the combat by plenty, and fail the Snake Eyes break test, and run away and get caught and die, with the Engineer and the BSB both dying in the process. The Warriors with the great weapons overrun into the Plague Furnace, now realizing how not nice that is, with great weapons and +1 strength on the charge. That's going to irritate that Plague Furnace to a severe degree. And just to pour a little salt on it, the Hammerers go ahead and overrun into the Slaves. At least that combat will last a little while, right? No, General's dead. That's, yeah, you know how that's going to go. To help things off from my side, the upper Hell Pit manages to make it into the Longbeard's flank, and the lower one manages to connect with the organ gun. Then we do our terrain effects. This time it's -1 armor save again on the Hammerers for the rest of the game. So those guys being down 1, that's nice. They could have been down 2, which would have been much sweeter, but oh well. Magic ends up 8 versus 7. I use 6 dice for Bless with Filth on the lower unit of Plague Monks, able to get that one off. Then I use the last 2 for Cloud of Corruption, really just a vain attempt at Cloud of Corruption, and that one fails. There's no shooting, so we hop back into combat. Lower Hell Pit doesn't have any problems doing his Avalanche of Flesh to kill off the organ gun and overrun off the board. As he's well off the screen already, why not be off the board as well? Then the Gutter Runners to the Gyrocopter. Each of those manage 1 wound, and they just basically stick around. Then to our upper combat, the Hell Pit does good on impact hits, but then he decides to feed in combat, and he rolls 3 out of 4 on 1s. So I guess he wasn't hungry after all. The Plague Monks do 1 wound, but the Furnace and the Thunderstomp are enough to win the combat. And not just by a little, but they win a combat by enough for the Longbeards to need Snake Eyes this time, since they're actually out of range of the BSB. They fail the break test and get cut down. Not too much of a problem. That's the reason for moving that Hell Pit in there, is because he gets that 3d6 pursuit and flee. The Slave combat goes a little bit differently, though. To make a short story even shorter, they die and explode. Not entirely my fault. I did let Chelsea roll for my break test. She had a tough one to do trying to get Snake Eyes, but still, she didn't come up with it. Lower combat, Plague Priest gets targeted and gets killed off the top of his furnace. There's a bunch of wounds that happen. I didn't make a note of how it really went. All I know is that the Plague Monks are unbreakable, so we're sticking around. We do our terrain at the start of the turn, like we're supposed to, and the Plague Monks end up with Wyson's Wild Form, which is perfect timing now that they're not in combat anymore. For movement, the copter fails its rally, and Steve just goes ahead and calls this thing dead. He's sick of dealing with it. It's out. It's gone. No magic or shooting, so we hop back into combat. Our Gutter Runners take 3 wounds from the copter, and they're unable to do any in return. They fail the break test and run and get caught. The only good side of it is the Gyrocopter, with its super fast pursuit speed, manages to make it into combat with the Hell Pit. Probably wishing he hadn't done quite so good. Lower combat, thanks to the poison effects, the Plague Monks actually managed to do 5 wounds, which is nice. I still lose the combat though, so that's nice too, right? Most stuff is moving along pretty quickly at this point. Clan Rats charge the flank of the warriors, but actually no, those are slaves. Don't realize it until like after the charge and I'm saying it into my recorder. It's like, oh yeah, I just charged with slaves. That's going to be really good. The upper furnace does a swift reform to face the warrior's rear, trying for that. And the lower Hell Pit comes back on the board, but he's not going to be doing much. No magic or shooting. We jump into combat. Hell Pit makes love to the Gyrocopter, despite its many protests. There are several wounds on the warriors and the Plague Monks. I actually win the combat this round, but he ends up stubborn because of his banner goodness and passes his break test. I hate dwarves because they're stubborn all the time. The obvious movement is the Hammerers making their charge on the flank of the Plague Monks. My only real hope here was that they would actually miss that one, but it wasn't going to happen. Engineer also decides to run from the fully erect Hell Pit that's in his face. Then we do the portal, the Sorcerer's Portal, casting a fireball on my upper Plague Monks for a wound. Thanks, dick move. With no magic or shooting, we hop back over to combat. The warriors end up taking a total of 4 wounds, and between them and the Hammerers, they're able to kill off all of the rank and file models from the Plague Monks. So I lose, the slaves explode, and then he reforms to get himself nice, up, and comfy. I do 2 Hail Mary charges here, one of them being important, the other one not really so much. The Furnace trying to go for the flank of the warriors. That's the only real hope, and of course I don't make that one. And I say, heck with it, go ahead and have the other Hell Pit and charge after the Engineer. Maybe he's got some roofies or something, but that doesn't work out. No magic or shooting, and for our final combat, the Plague Furnace kills off 5 warriors with its final Enshrouded by Fog effect, and then it gets ground into rubble. We go ahead and call the game there. It's pretty much as bad as it's going to get, as bad as I want it to get, that's for certain. I'm down by about 800 points, maybe a little more, after we account for the banners and my general getting factored in. The important thing to note out of this game is don't charge if there isn't a way for you to actually get a flank, especially when you're going to need one. When I charged the Iron Drakes, I should have realized then, even if I had won, I was going to have to overrun into the Hammerers, and I would have to have another unit come in and flank the Hammerers if I'm going to win that combat. So once they had charged out, that unit was lost either way. It was going to come out the same. Still, I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure and check back for more videos each week. I'm doing them all the time. Like the video if you want to see more. I really appreciate it. And you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter as well. Till next time, you guys keep fighting.